Up music, low feelings. This is Aurian Archive, and welcome back to Hybrid Theory. Once again, we are focusing in on the Steam Deck. Over the last several live streams now, I've kind of rambled all over the place discussing various aspects of the Steam Deck console and why I think it is possibly more powerful in terms of computational performance than is currently expected, or at least as expected in comparison to other systems powered by AMD currently available on the retail market. And to that end, as you can see on the screen, I've got kind of an outline in K-Write for a change. For these live streams, I've kind of liked the format of going at it freestyle, letting what I'm thinking dictate what I talk about. I think that makes for a more engaging conversation since I don't really have anybody else right now to bounce thoughts and ideas off of. Uh, However, I kind of would like to, how should we say, um, poke at whatever you want to call it, a couple of these Valve software accounts that I still think I have valid email addresses for, and I'd like them to at least listen in on one of these live streams without me being too tangential to the subject at hand. So well, I'm going to try and follow this outline and go over the unanswered questions, or what hasn't been confirmed by Valve or by an AMD, or what is not known in the Steamworks software development kit or the other information derived from Steamworks. And to start with, I'm got to focus in on that memory topology. We still really don't know how the Zen 2 cores and the RDNA 2 compute units connect to the four memory controllers. I'm assuming at this point that it probably is something akin to Infinity Fabric. And if you're not familiar with Infinity Fabric, we'll do a quick search here, and we'll see that there's actually WikiChip has an article on it, and they show some of the interconnect architectures and a quick overview of how Infinity Scalable Data Fabric and the Infinity Scalable Control Fabric are supposed to work. So I'm assuming in the case of the Steam Deck that we're probably looking at an Infinity Fabric type connection where all the cores have access to all four memory controllers, and that's processor or graphics. Now, the way the Zen 2 cores are constructed, if you are not familiar with hyperthreading, and I realize this is diving down a rabbit hole, hyperthreading was originally constructed as a way by Intel in order to extract performance out of the very deep pipelined Pentium 4s. The Pentium 4s had something like 31, 32 different stages, and when you have that many stages, a pipeline stall means your processor just accomplished nothing. No matter how high you ramp your clock speed, if your processor didn't do anything, you've lost clock cycles. What I'm assuming here, and that the SMT format that Intel eventually later perfected and that Zen appears to use, there are more resources available to each separate core. So you really could realistically call the Zen 2 design an 8-core design where some of the aspects of the core are shared across, or some aspects of what AMD terms a core are shared across two minor cores. Now, I realize that may be a terrible way of explaining it. There's better write ups out there. But we really don't know is if each thread is capable of directing a memory controller on its own. And that's an interesting concept, depending on how this is actually configured. What's the actual breakdown? Or are the cores tied to a standard memory controller like we would normally expect, or is this Infinity Fabric? What's going on here? The other thing that I brought up in previous streams, we don't know the storage topology. NVMe is kind of a big deal, and again, if you're not familiar with it, probably a good idea to look it up. And, I don't really like linking to Wikipedia, but here we go anyways. NVM Express, or Non-Volatile Memory Host Controller interface specification, is basically a way of accessing memory randomly. It's instead of accessing it serially, you can access the memory at any particular point. So NVMe controllers, by default, by design, should be, comparatively speaking, faster performing than non NVMe controllers. And for the most part, across the solid state drives that have come out over time, that has held up. Now, what we really don't know here is this eNMC. It's Valve says that it's a solid state drive, PCI Gen 2 X1. So it's definitely slower. Just how much slower? Now, the theory that I raised in previous streams is that I think there's a strong possibility based on the Radeon Pro SSG that this particular APU is designed and constructed in such a way that the solid state drive can be used for either system memory or graphics memory. And, okay, let's say that that's the case. Let's say that you could effectively double the memory. Now, we know from a standard Linux configuration, a safe Linux configuration. I realize there are some desktop Linuxes out there today now that do not use the configuration of a separate root partition, separate swap partition, and a separate home partition. I prefer this configuration because it puts another barrier between a potential hacker and getting access to your system. In previous live streams, I've discussed why sudo is a terrible addition to the modern Linux software ecosystem, and I really hope Valve has nuked sudo out of the box. SU password. Please put in your password if you do anything with your root information, anything that modifies the operating itself. Use a password protection. It's just basic good security practices. Do not use sudo ever. Okay, getting away from the point. So again, we don't know yet exactly what the memory topology is of the solid state drives on the Steam Deck. I'm assuming, since Valve, been working with Linux systems for quite a while now, that they're probably not going to go with the model where the root operating system is exposed through through features that can be, in a trivial manner, bypassed or used to hijack the system. I just don't see that happening. So, what we may be able to extrapolate now is, in the case of the 64 gig drive, I expect, based on my current experience running desktop Linuxes, knowing how much average space and average installation with all the tools and utilities, all the applications that a user probably needs to have that cannot be installed in the user space. And for reference, almost, or as far as I found, every single game that you can run on Steam Linux through Proton or otherwise can be installed in the user space. It does not need root access. Because of that, I think Valve only needs maybe 15, 16 gigs total. I have my root drive set up on this system for 20 gigs. And I do know that if I don't update the system on a regular basis, I go 6 or 7 months and turn it back on and update it, I can actually run out of root space memory because there are so many packages in flight. So there is a possibility here that there is a cap here. Valve may want a little bit more space than 20 gigabytes. So let's say, for safety's sake, compare. In previous streams, I brought up how much space the Xbox One, I did look at the Xbox One, the Xbox Series S and X, and the PlayStation 5, and their operating system installs are huge, in excess of triple digit gigabytes. So 100, 120 plus are taken up by the operating system and the underlying system software. I know for a fact that Valve's Steam and a standard Linux distribution do not need that much space. My guess right now is that I think on the 64 gig version, I think that 32 gigs of that will be uh, set aside for use by Steam, and some of it will be used as a swap file. Some of it may be used as virtual RAM or a memory extension for the graphics card. Again, we don't know about the internal topology, other than it's a solid state style drive. Okay? Other unanswered questions. The backend for rendering. Now, I don't know what display is actually being used on the Steam Deck. And in an earlier stream, I kind of went down a rabbit hole on this where I looked at the VESA display HDR performance levels and specifications, and I brought up specifically the monitor that I use on my desktop computer, which is a Nixius NX Edge 34. Now, the Nixius is an HDR 400 monitor. It does do 10-bit color channel. It does do 100% sRGB. It does do 400 nit. Um, and based on those specifications, looking at what we know about the Steam display from the specifications page, there is a possibility that this panel could be a 10-bit HDR capable display. Now that combines with something else that Valve has revealed over the last couple of days, and that the games they are targeting to run on the Steam Deck, they are only testing at 30 frames per second on a screen that has a 60 hertz rating. Now, there's a couple of extrapolations we can take from this. The first is that the display is in fact FreeSync compatible, and that Valve will be using FreeSync in order to ensure a smooth display, because it has some room to move from 30 frames per second with a 60 hertz refresh. We can also presume, maybe, and this is based on the Vulkan multi-GPU, and we'll just do a search on that, and uh, we see that there is actually a couple of bits of information about multi-GPU rendering with the Vulkan API. Now, when most people hear multi-GPU, they think, Crossfire or SLI. But it's not quite that. Simple's not the right word. The better example here would be big dot little. The well, let's try that in the search engine. Live streaming arm big dot little. I did not need to see those images. I'm not even sure what that was. I don't want to know. All right, ARM big dot little is the architectural layout described to current ARM processors, which ship with cores that have a significant power advantage, like multiple ARM57 cores coupled with multiple ARM A53 cores. And the idea is that if you don't need a lot of processing power, your device can run on a small number, the smaller cores that don't require as much power. And if you're using an application where you need something done very quickly in a hurry, the system fires up the bigger cores. And ARM, I think it gives us the date here. This is 2011 was when Big Dot Little was announced. Give me a second. Excuse me. Anyway, so 2011, Big Dot Little is announced. It's coming up on its 10-year birthday. And in modern day smartphones, the big dot little architecture have been optimized and configured inside the Linux kernel, and now you kind of expect multi-day battery life out of a standard phone with an ARM-based processor. You don't question it, you just expect it. And that's really what Vulkan is aimed at. Vulkan is aimed at multi-GPU in terms of having very powerful processing cores which hand loads in and out or to and from smaller processor cores. Now, we haven't, as far as I know, seen any Mali GPU or other ARM designs or any other manufacturer designs using a big dot little style approach in a graphics processor. Instead, we've seen, instead of adding multiple graphics processors, there's an NPU. The term, uh, and this is where I kind of have to, okay, they call it neural processing unit. And that really, we're talking about a vector processor is what we're talking about. We're talking about a specific kind of processor that is very good at specific kinds of mathematical problems. It's a dedicated calculator built into the rest of the system. Now, keeping that in mind, keeping that Vulkan was designed for big dot little style load shifting, that does open up some possibilities about how the Steam Deck could actually be using those compute units. Assuming that they can be controlled in a big dot little design on maximum battery power, and as Valve's talking like 9-10 hours of time using the handheld on battery mode, the system may be able to power down to just one CU operating. And if that's the case, then further generations building on that kind of approach may make it could make all the difference for AMD if they are the first company in partnership with Valve to land a big dot little style load shifting in the graphics processor on a handheld device. Like I said, I'm not aware of this actually being used in any other shipping graphics processor. I'm very sure Nvidia is not using it in any of the recently displayed RTX plus ARM processor designs. So this is again big open question here. What is the topology? What is the configuration? Is this actually going to be the first big dot little style GPU configuration in a handheld unit? Has AMD beaten everyone else to the market? And the other question, the back end rendering performance. Excuse me. And this is where we get to some of the other tabs that were up here. And that previously, I talked in a previous stream, I talked a bit about the jump in design or the jump in performance between the 2007 R600 and the 2000, well, also 2007. When did? Yeah, okay. The Radeon HD 2000 series was 2007, and the Radeon HD 3000 series was across 2007 and 2008. And just for comparison, over on the NVIDIA side, if we look in 2007, we're looking at the GeForce 8000 series compared to the GeForce 9000 series. Now, if you were around for that, you probably know as well as everyone else that the GeForce 9800 series was not a significant performance improvement over the G100 8800 series. In fact, going from G80 or a G92 in some cases, as it was branded, to G92B was barely a change at all. Maybe some higher clock speeds, but if you bought an 8800 Ultra or an 8800 GTX or the 8800 GTS 512, you weren't seeing much of a benefit going to 9800 anything, if at all. Now, conversely, when we look at the AMD side, the Radeon HD 2000 series, and I had a mobile Radeon HD 26 something that was in an Asus F3 F Asus F35K, I think. Asus F35K, or was it F53K? Uh, yeah, I haven't had a laptop in years. If I could have actually remembered the model number off the top of my head, that would have been something. F35KA? Maybe? Okay, anyways. And the point I was making in the earlier stream, and I'll remake that point now, is that the HD 2000 series was lackluster in performance. It got ran over like a freight train by the GeForce 88 GeForce 8000 series at the time. Well, flash forward barely a year later, as we got into the end of 2007 and the release of the HD 3000 series, AMD had gone through a die shrink. They went from 80 nanometers to 55 nanometers. They shrunk the die square from 420 millimeters squared down to 192 millimeters squared. And their wattage on the XT version, which was 215 watts, on the HD 308070 dropped to 106 watts, so nearly half the power. And as you went down and you looked at the performance, the 3870, uh, despite in some aspects using a lot less power, was turning in 12.40 gigatexels, 12.40 gigapixels, and 72 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, compared to the 29XT, which was only 11.87 gigatexels and gigapixels. And okay, at the top end, the 2900 XT was pushing 128 gigabyte memory bandwidth. But in real world gameplay, the 3870 was not only trounced the 29XT, it also was trading blows. I mean, just body blow after body blow with the GeForce 9600 series. Same fundamental architecture. We're still talking about effectively the R600 architecture. No fundamental changes. A die shrink, some tweaks, and AMD ATI went from a graphic card that was barely competent. In fact, I think in some ways calling it competent might be a stretch. Uh, that was barely capable of giving anybody a reason to look at it. The same architecture went on with a little bit of massaging and tweaking to be the gaming graphic card that everybody wanted to have. And it's not the first time that AMD managed to do that with an architecture. They did it again with the Hawaiian series. And, if we just go back to the AMD list and scroll down, and we get all the way to the HD series, the HD 5000 series. The HD 4000 series was kind of a dud. It landed with, well, it wasn't a massive performance upgrade over the HD 3000 series. And then you had the HD 5000 series, which was in some ways almost the going from the 4770 to the 5770. Maybe you weren't changing all that much. You went from DirectX 10 to DirectX 11, but even then that was just minor specification bump. And we kind of went away from the naming by the component numbers to the code names. But I think the key point here is you get down to RV830 indicating, excuse me for a second, indicating the die shift and other changes. And again here, AMD went from a not so great product, the 4000 series, when I forget what lined up against the Nvidia series, and then he got the 5000 series, and the 5000 series was great. The HD 6000 series, kind of a dud. The HD 7000 series, amazing. And that's really kind of what AMD pattern has been like over time. They start out with a not so great architecture, they figure out what went wrong, they change it around, they update it, they massage it, and suddenly it's the architecture everybody wants to use. Which brings us back to the semi-custom 8 RDNA2 compute units used in the Steam Deck. What we don't know here, we really don't know, is just how customized these compute units are. We do not know if these are the same compute units that are used in the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. We don't know if these are the same compute units that are used in the theoretically shipping current 6000 series Radeon cards. We don't know if these are the same. Well, we do know they are not the same compute units used in the Radeon 5700 series. Uh, so there is that. We do know that for certain. We also don't know, have these picked up any uh, clues, any cues, any design changes from Samsung's RDNA2 license. We don't know if RDNA2 licensees can communicate with each other and discuss internally the changes they are making to the RDNA2 to make it more suitable for mobile applications or to extract more performance. We don't know what changes Valve has made. We don't even really know if Valve has a license to customize RDNA2 on their own and make their own RDNA2 chips from a foundry separately of AMD. We don't know that. Now, if we can make some interesting extrapolations if we assume that Valve has purchased a license to RDNA2 and RDNA3 and that Valve has spent some time talking with other hardware vendors who have licensed the RDNA2 design, specifically Samsung, and that we make the extrapolation assumption that these processors used in the Steam Deck are being fabbed in a Samsung foundry. Again, this is extrapolation. We don't know yet if that's what's happening. We don't know if these processors are being sourced from global foundries, TSMC, Samsung, or maybe a third party or someone who's not showing their cards yet. For all we know, Valve may own a fabrication facility now. We don't know. So, that also brings up, what's the back end look like? And this was why I was originally looking at these cards before in an earlier stream, and I focused in on the graphic card that is doing its best to keel over and die in my desktop. And that's the Hawaii XT, known the Radeon R9 290X 4 GB, first launched in 2013. So it's on its 8th birthday. And if we look over on the 290X, we see that it has 64 ROPS. Now, I realize that ROPS may not mean anything to a number of people. And for comparison, we'll just go quickly look up the GeForce 1660 Ti that this computer is currently running on, and there it is. And we see over here our ROP count on the 1660 Ti is 48. Now, the raster operations are basically what flips the image that the graphics card creates and actually puts it on a screen. The more ROPS you have, the higher resolutions your graphics card can address without incurring a performance penalty. If you have only 32 ROPS and you try to throw a QHD class display that's 1440p or higher, or 1440p ultra wide, if you try and throw uh, a that kind of resolution screen onto a high resolution display, you will have a severe performance penalty beyond what the card would actually be capable of because the ROPS become a bottleneck. And that was what I've stated this before, and I stand by it. I believe that the Polaris team had a RX 590 with a 64 ROP backend lifted, I believe, from the Hawaii series or from the, what was that, the Southern Islands, the Fijis, that they had basically taken that kind of backend, those massive 64 128 ROP backends, fitted onto Polaris, and had Polaris pumping out QHD resolutions on the RX 590 processor very well. In fact, so well as I heard it, it was tromping on the Vega 56 toes, and a certain person no longer at AMD couldn't stand the thought of Polaris uh, giving Vega 56 a run for its money. Well, getting off topic, so we really don't know. We look at the RX 5600, and the RX 5600 actually went to 64 ROPS. Now, if you could have bought a 5600, it probably would have been the first graphics card, uh, mainstream graphics card, to actually catch up to the R9 to the to 8-year old R9 290X in all resolutions, because it finally gets rid of that hamstringing on the resolution output. And what we really don't know is we don't know what the ROP backend is on the Steam Deck. We don't know how effective the Steam Deck is at taking a display rendered inside the graphics processor and putting it on a larger screen. Now, I can't imagine, since Valve, there's in here, if we go down to somewhere in connectivity expansion. Okay, when we look at DisplayPort Alt mode up to 8K at 60 Hz or 4K at 120 Hz, we know it's never going to render graphics at that resolution. But I'm struggling to see how Valve could possibly drive a 4K 120 Hz display with any kind of uh, success unless they had at least a 64 ROP backend. So the presumption here, and it's a big presumption, is that Valve may have done what AMD didn't do with Polaris and fitted this low-end mobile graphics card with an oversized ROP backend to make it better prepared to do media playback as a media device. Let's just play this out. You may only be able to play your games in 1920 by 1080 or 1280 by 800 scaled up, or running through a scaler. AMD's gotten pretty good at this checkerboard upscaling. Excuse me. Anyways, AMD's gotten pretty good at the upscaling. So that's where clarification on exactly what kind of backend we're looking at would clarify what the system is capable of in terms of overall media performance. Now, if it is saddled with 32 ROPS, then we're not looking at any realistic video performance over a 1080p stream. We're just not. Okay? Moving on, the specification for compatibility and performance. And what I mean by this is we have an idea what the minimum performance level is. The minimum performance level defined as 448 gigaflops at FP32, or on the CPU side, or 1.6 teraflops FP32. And quick note here, that's an insane number for a mobile unit on FP16. I'm doing the math in my head. Uh, Looking at those figures, we have an idea of what the upper end performance Valve is looking at. We have an idea at the memory throughput Valve is looking at. We know that Valve is using a Linux operating system. We are pretty sure that sorry, that's not the page I want, that Valve is using AMD's open source drivers and modifying them and employing people to work on the AMD open source driver in order to better handle problems that arrive in the software within the Steam Deck. And this is going back to the previous streams. The Steam Deck is the anti-Steam machine. With the Steam machines, Valve is relying on the vendors downstream to fix problems in the software. Valve's not doing that this time. They're using open source drivers on a system they can employ people to work on, and so if a problem comes up, Valve can employ the developers to fix those problems. They're not trusting on an ODM, they're not trusting an OEM, they're not even really trusting the upstream vendors. This can all be done vertically integrated in-house. And there's another big success story there with Apple, who, say what you will about Apple hardware being overpriced and underperforming. And in a previous stream, I did outline that I believe Apple is using the graphics processor to do floating point operations on the M1 in order to offload a performance load on the central processor, thus making the entire system look faster, even if they're just being incredibly more efficient, because so few developers want to take the time to learn OpenCL. Excuse me. I really am going to have to take an antihistamine, I just know it. Alright, and that comes down to, as we're also looking at here, the compatibility performance, we do see multi-channel audio via DisplayPort over USB-C. And this kind of comes back to what I was talking about before. We really don't know the internal specifications. We know what the maximum transfer speed of USB-C is. What we don't know is, and well, since I did this in a previous stream, I'll bring it up again. One of the big problems with the Nintendo Switch is that Nintendo went to Nvidia and picked up a bog standard, barely Vulkan 1.0 compliant, just barely certified compatible Tegra X1, which at that time wasn't even a recent version of Tegra. It was an older version used in the Nvidia Shield handheld. Nintendo did that, I believe, to keep Nvidia in line because Nvidia has a bad reputation with hardware and software vendors for being a bad partner. Now, when you keep that in mind and you think about the Steam Deck, we know that when Nintendo and Nvidia, they never explored any of the uh, interesting implications of NVLink over USB Type-C. We don't know if Valve's not doing that with AMD. We don't know if there is some extra transport mode over the USB-C port. We do know that uh, it says it's DisplayPort 1.4 alt mode. Well, what all does DisplayPort 1.4 offer? And DisplayPort 1.4. And if we do, a quick look on these specifications, and okay, we have cable matters, DisplayPort 1.2 versus 1.4, and okay, that was not really helpful. Just a lot of things from cable matter, so let's just go look up DisplayPort. No, I do not want to go to Dailymotion. I'm not sure that was what I really wanted to get to. Okay. Okay, displayport.org. It's a good thing I'm running on a Linux system and running a browser with AdBlock, because otherwise that could have been ugly. Okay, updated display mode, updated DisplayPort alt mode spec to bring DisplayPort 2.0 performance to USB 4 and new USB Type-C devices. New USB Type-C devices. New USB Type-C devices. New USB Type-C devices. I'm repeating that over and over because we see on the Steam Deck specification page, it's USB-C with DisplayPort 1.4 alt mode support. But is that really what the unit's going to ship with? Is it? Okay, with DisplayPort alt mode, the USB-C connector can transmit up to 80 gigabits per second of DisplayPort video data, utilizing all 4 high-speed lanes in the cable, or up to 40 gigabytes for simultaneous super-speed USB data delivery. Okay, so, question here. If the Steam Deck is actually shipping with DisplayPort 2.0 instead of DisplayPort 1.4, over USB Type-C. Let's say that the time frame is working out. And the hardware is probably finished. Let me try and phrase this as a question, because goes into possible hardware software revisions, which was the next one on there. All we have here for a connection, it says USB-C. If we come back up here to connectivity, we have to Bluetooth 5.0, we have dual band Wi-Fi radio, all the way out to AC. As we look through here, there's not actually a specification listed for what that USB Type-C port is, other than USB Type-C. That's an interesting question then, isn't it? Because it's saying it's doing Type-C power delivery 3.0. USB Type-C power delivery 3.0. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, and again, it's sort of like that really wasn't helpful. Let's come back to VESA. And let's just do a power. Power management, power delivery. Nothing on this page, but let's go back and just look over what we have, or what we think we have. Products, DisplayPort, resources, DisplayPort over USB-C. Okay, let's look up USB-C power delivery and see what that gives us. Blog. Well, again, got a bunch of, okay. USB.org. USB power delivery. And USB 3.2. USB 3.0 adapters, agreements. Okay, so again, this really isn't helpful. You could do USB 3 power delivery 3.0 over USB 4, and it's part of USB 4 adapter agreement. And the US Power Delivery version 3.1 major update. Okay, which one is the Steam Deck? The Steam Deck says Power Delivery 3.0. So it says using USB Type-C Power Delivery 3.0 power supply. Doesn't say it's actually using a 3.1 or that it couldn't use a 3.1, just that it's shipping with a 3.0. So again, questions here. And what exactly is the USB-C port? Now, we kind of have to assume that Valve is sending orders out for manufacture now. So let's go back and let's talk about the actual construction itself. Now, personally, there is one thing that I would change about the Steam Pad as it is right now. And that is, I would not have a single USB-C type port. I would have gone with dual ports, and I probably wouldn't have done a headphone jack. And yeah, I can already hear the howls and frustrations, and that gets us into some of the other windows that were open. There's a couple of different solutions to getting headphone audio out of a USB connection. I mean, I've got a topping NX2S DAC amp. I've told the story before. I've got a topping NX4 DSD DAC amp. I've picked up a Zorlu Super DAC S, and I'm probably one of the few people here who read the original reviews on previous Zorlu products and noted that everyone complained about the pack-in USB cables being trash, and picked up my own. As far as I can tell, the Zorlu Super Deck S has been flawless. It's done exactly what I wanted it to do. And then there's better brands like the DD Hi-Fi. Uh, Straight shot, I do have one of these TC35s on order. So I'm one of those 49 suckers that bought one. And I'm planning on comparing it to the Zorlu. And if you're looking for an inline connector to power a wired set of headphones, excuse me, generally speaking, these USB DAC amps are a better option than a headphone jack on your device. And the simplest reason I can give you on why that is almost universally so is that there's almost always a power delivery limitation on a headphone jack. The power delivery limitation over a USB connection, specifically Type-C, is significantly larger. You can power heavier cans off of a USB DAC than you can off of an inbuilt headphone jack. And in most cases, that means you will get better audio quality even if you're using a low-end media generation source. And I'll pick on YouTube. If you're watching YouTube videos, you will still see, on average, better quality over using a USB DAC amp over using an inbuilt headphone jack. Now, that being said, going back and looking at the Steam Deck specifications, Valve seems to have kept this in mind, and that they say they have stereo with an embedded digital signal processor. We really don't know yet how extensive this is. I'm assuming it's comparable to the current sound systems that ship on integrated Radeon laptops. I mean, and that's okay. Those are perfectly fine. They work well enough. I don't think it's. I don't think that going with a stereo jack was really the best use of available real estate. I really think a second Type-C port would have been a better option. That being said, I do understand the appeal of everyone who already has wired headphones, who already have their favorite set of cans. They don't want to change them out. They don't want to go get a Bluetooth pair. They don't want to spend the extra money. They don't want to get a USB DAC because so many of the ones they're familiar with are junk. And to be fair, if you walk into a normal retailer and you get a USB DAC amp from your average electronics store, it's probably not going to be very good. It just isn't. You really do have to put a little bit of research into it, and to be fair, a good high-end or medium-range DAC amp is probably going to run as much as or it's going to cost more on average. And I'm just going to look up we're going to go to soundcore.com. And we're going to Soundcore because I have a couple of Soundcore headsets. I've talked before about the Soundcore Liberty Pros. But we're going to look at headphones, we're going to go over the ear, and we're going to look at the Life Q30s. Now, the Life Q30s cost $80. A good USB DAC amp is probably going to cost you more than an aptX compatible Bluetooth headphones that are probably going to sound better than the cans you probably already own that are wired over Bluetooth. I mean, well, why would you spend more when spending the same amount of money would get you a better pair of cans to begin with? I think it's a valid question. And I really do think it's going to matter looking at the Steam Deck because of everything that it supports. I'm not sure that the headphone jack is really a big selling point. I mean, it may be. I get it that there are a number of people who swear by their wired headphone jacks and will stay with them. Don't want to spend them. They'll spend $700 on a pair of Sony headphones and then whimper at spending $100 on a good DAC amp to drive them with. I mean, I don't understand it, but I understand there are people out there that do that. Okay, so that is one design change that I would make. And the primary reason why I would make that design change is because going back to the earlier question about the exact USB standard being used, how much data transfer are we talking about here? Uh, and where I'm really going with this is external GPUs. And going back to the NVLink, Nintendo Nvidia, I I think Nintendo missed a big chance here with the Switch to put a more powerful GPU in a Switch dock and drive more powerful display when the unit is plugged in. That would have made a lot more sense, economical, market sense, to get a dock that enables higher frame rates or better performance when plugged in. So you can have your mobile gaming and then you get home, you plug it in, and NVLink kicks in, and you've now got a more powerful display. You can now run higher resolutions, more frame rates, whatever. And well, that never happened, and Nintendo's still playing games with the Switch Pro, so I've I've said it before. Nintendo's philosophy has almost always appeared to be we want we want the solution that is electrically inadequate and completely inappropriate for our purposes, and that's the one we're going to buy even though it's more expensive. That's been Nintendo's philosophy. We're talking about a company that shipped an ARM v7 processor when ARM v8 was already on the market. Doesn't make any sense. So I Nintendo had a chance here to get their foot in the door and say what's going on with Switch Pro. If they can't get Switch Pro because Nvidia's cut a deal with the CCP, then Nintendo just needs to come out and say that. Go talk to, well, it's not like the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has been of use as of late. It's not like the FCC's been of use any late. So, okay, fair point. Nintendo may not have had anyone to really go talk to and say, there's some violations here you need to look into. Maybe that'll come after the 2022 elections, but okay, we're heading off into a tangent. Let's get back on track and talk about the Steam Deck itself. I would like to see a dock with an eGPU built in. And personally, if I was Valve, I would only sell that dock as a DLC option to people who have a Steam account logged in to the Steam Deck that they bought with that Steam account. And again, going back to when we look at the uh, didn't want to do the reserve. If we go back and we look at I think it's the overview, and somewhere down here it says easy, have power on, sign in, play your Steam games. Now, I'm assuming here that signing in to Steam, the way this is probably configured, that Valve has linked Steam to the, what is it, K-user? K-user, or I'm assuming that when you log into your Steam account, that is being set in the background as your user account slash home slash username account for the Linux distribution. So if you sign in with Gordon, your account, you should now be on partition slash home slash Gordon, and everything's now done through there. But I think this may also be a trap for scalpers, because if somebody bought a Steam Deck on one account, say Gordon 2, and the person who logs in with it is Gordon 3, Gordon 3 may find themselves locked out, and Gordon 2 may find their account with a VAC ban. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I think anybody scalping the Steam Deck probably hasn't thought this through very well, and that they may not only torch themselves for being the scalper, they may also torch anybody who bought from a scalper. So if you bought from a scalper, cancel, try and get your money back if you can. Uh, just do a reservation, get it when you get it. Alright, that's safest way to go about this. Less way to be out a significant amount of money any way you go. And coming back to the dock expansion, that's where I think there's a. If I was Valve, that's how I would do it. Is I would sell external GPUs, and again, it comes back to the question that I asked before: does Valve have an RDNA 2 license? Can Valve fabricate RDNA 2 chips separate of AMD through a foundry either Valve owns or Valve is contracted with? Because if Valve can do that, then we realistically could see a Steam dock with an external GPU, an RDNA 2 or RDNA 3 design, and give the Steam Deck further performance down the line. You know, if and could you do that over USB Type C? Certainly. Would it be easier over a USB 4 specification? Yes, it would be. Would it be easier to do that if you had two USB Type C ports? I think it would be significantly easier. So again, we don't know enough about the connectivity and what's going on behind the scenes with the chipset and what this actually supports in throughput or output. And that also brings us up into possible future hardware revisions. This is just the first production run. We could see in the future Valve put out an edition that swapped the headphone jack for a second Type C port. We could see Valve put out next year a revision that, if this was USB 3.1 or 3.2 or whatever it is on now, that bumps up to USB 4. We could also see if somebody meets the hardware and software revision, the hardware and software compatibility. I mean, we know NVIDIA is not going to do it. NVIDIA doesn't understand open source. They have no idea why developers, why hardware vendors, why everyone else needs open source drivers. But there's another company that does, and Intel. Intel has an amazing open source uh, backing. Their almost all of their graphics drivers are available through the Intel open source organization. You have a bunch of different projects that Intel backs. And as you go through here, and this what I think is going to be a big detailer for the Z GPU, is if Intel is able to get a massive adoption of Z GPU in the retail market by simply virtue of having that stock. And again, this comes back to, can Valve manufacture RDNA 2 GPUs separate of AMD? Can they go to their own foundry or can they contract separately? Because if they can, that's a big deal. Because that's the advantage Intel presently offers for its upcoming Z GPUs, is the fact that Intel owns its own foundries. Intel has its own production facilities. Intel can make its own memory, I believe. I'm pretty sure the foundries can do that. Excuse me. So all of these different open source packages Intel offers, I could very realistically see within the next calendar year Intel offering in partnership with Valve a Steam Deck that has an Intel processor with an Intel Z GPU. I could also see Intel, in partnership with Valve, offering a processor that has an AMD CPU and an Intel Z GPU, Xe GPU. Now, I could see that happening, and again, that really depends on, can anybody meet this hardware specifications that Valve has set. You must meet these minimum requirements. You meet these minimum requirements, you use our clinics, everything runs, your drivers are open source, we can work on them, we can employ people to work on them, then sure, fine, we can use your hardware. And so that's what I expect the future to hold. Is we will probably see updates and further revisions of the Steam Deck in the future that offer more power and more performance. We could even see Valve do what Sony completely failed to do with the PS Vita. Now, the PS Vita, what gamers demanded, what gamers expected, was for Sony to take its flagship phone series, the Xperia phones, slap the hardware into the Vita chassis, and release it with full Android support, not partial hack it in, just full Android support out of the box. And Sony could have been on top of this whole gaming phone phenomenon that's going on, where you have the Nubia Red Magic, you have Xiaomi with the, what is it, the Black Shark, you've got uh, Razer with the gaming phone now. I think you've got all these different options for gaming specific phones that are all packing Snapdragon 888s or MediaTek's Dimension 1200 Dimension. I can't say it. I can't say it unless I'm looking at it. You've got these options coming along. You've got Samsung saying next year we're introducing RDNA 2 in a phone, which those are going to be gaming phones. Now, Valve has targeted the market correctly here in that controls matter. To poke fun at ZTE for a second, they are the ones who own uh, Red Magic, redmagic.gg, and to kind of poke fun at no, I do not want to see notifications. Later. Come on, give me accessories. This is the pro handle for the Red Magic 6R, which is basically a D-pad with an analog stick. And somewhere down here was a picture of it hooked up together, and it's kind of looks silly. Now, I think if Red Magic ever got around to doing a handheld with controller components and part of the handheld, it would probably be a big seller for them because controls matter. Actually having physical access to physical buttons really makes a gaming device, a mobile gaming device, work. That's why Nintendo keeps being successful with mobile devices. They have proper controls. That's why I think the Steam Deck is going to take off like wildfire. It has proper controls. It's not a device masquerading as a gaming device. It is a gaming device. Now, that being said, coming back to dock expansion eGPU. And I really kind of want to focus on that. I think that could be a big deal is if we do get an eGPU over USB Type-C and it works. The Steam Deck could become the core upgrade. You buy a Steam Deck today, you buy a dock with a more powerful GPU next year, and you'd still be able to play the games you have. And if Valve can release, like, say, the Steam Deck this year cost 600 something dollars for the top end with the 512 gigabytes NVMe. Let's say that next year you bought an RDNA 2 dock or an RDNA 3 dock for 250, less than half the cost. And then if you did an upgrade cycle like that, where you maybe if you bought both of those, then the next year you get a discount, say $100 off the next version of the Steam Deck because you brought the expansion dock and you bought the original Steam Deck. If Valve does that kind of stacking uh, upgrade where being a loyal customer, buying Steam games and buying decks and docks gets you discounts over the next full version of the deck and dock. And let's say we're looking at a 2-year cadence on decks and a 2-year cadence on docks. Like every other year there's a new deck and every other year there's a new dock. If Valve gets in that kind of cadence where they just upgrade one of those every other year and gives discounts for having owned those or bought each one to people who buy into them or buy the next one down the line or whatever. Not only does Valve increase the people who are buying up to date, maybe more up to date hardware, they also increase the pool of devices filtering out secondhand. And that's where I think a big factor will be in that the Steam Deck might be a great Christmas gift if it's delivered before Christmas. It might be the all-in-one media center desktop replacement computer for somebody who hasn't been able to buy a decent computer because of the supply shortage, the artificial supply shortages. Now, will Valve do that? I don't know. From a business standpoint, it may actually make more sense to do a 1.5-year cadence on hardware changes, or maybe a 2-year cadence on hardware changes. And Well, there's already in the one outline just framed, but that also depends on eGPU in a dock going forward, but might not do that. Okay, the redacted here was the one I already brought up. A Steam Deck by Intel. I really do see that as a possibility. I think Intel is so desperate to not fall too far behind AMD right now that they will cut those deals, they will do whatever it takes. Intel already has a great open source background, so that we probably will see an Intel powered Steam Deck years before we see an NVIDIA powered Steam Deck. Now, the next question is, could Valve be looking at further devices? Could we be talking about a Steam phone? Now, again, this comes back to the operating system and Proton itself. Proton is presently optimized based on Wine to be compiled for x86. Let's do a quick search here. Let's just go look it up. I'm in the wrong window. Wine HQ ARM 64. What do we get? Okay, we find that ARM 64 port is already underway. It's a pure WineLib port. They have been working on it since 2013. Now, what this could mean is that Proton running on an ARM processor, but with RDNA2 graphics or ZGPU graphics, could still offer Vulkan OpenGL performance and wrapping for all of the programs currently supported by Wine, and that could be a big advantage going forwards. Like this first dock may be a might be a Zen processor with RDNA2 GPUs. The next generation could be an ARM processor, or there could be a side generation that has an ARM processor. And we could back this down where we could realistically see Valve offer a Steam phone where you get the Steam interface, the Linux operating system. I don't think I muted the mic. Wow. To quote a song, I'm not sick, but I'm definitely not well. Woof. Alright, let's try and wrap this up. Okay, could Valve be looking at a Steam phone? Part of me says no. Valve has so many irons in the fire. I think a phone would just be disambiguating the market too much. You just do a handheld device with controls. If you did a Steam phone, that might it would be such a mixed message. Now Valve has lots of resources. They have a pretty good background. If I look up KDE on phones, and we do have Plasma Mobile. And Plasma Mobile is designed to run a Linux desktop on a phone. Valve is already using KDE for the Steam Deck, so a Steam phone also using KDE probably wouldn't actually be that big of a stretch for Valve. I mean, if anything, it would give them increased coverage over the market. Uh, it may even replace the Steam Link as a low-end device. I mean, let's just say that you, uh, and this is another question that just popped into my head. And let's go back to this window. What licenses have Valve bought? I can't type either. Wow, that. Okay, I'll be fine. I'm still alive, I think. If I'm not, I'm sure somebody will let me know. What licenses have Valve bought? Does Valve have an RDNA 2, 3, X license? Does Valve have a Zen license? Does Valve have an ARM license? I think these are actually pretty valid questions to ask. If we assume for a second that Valve has an RDNA 2 license and can manufacture RDNA 2 or RDNA 3 or RDNA whatever follows chips on their own, contracting a foundry separately or owning their own foundry, that's a good question as well. Does Valve own its own fabrication facility? I think that's a really good question to ask. Valve's been kind of quiet on the public working front. We really don't know. We know they've hired a lot of people. We know they've expanded and have different hardware prototyping and construction facilities. Do they actually own their own fabrication facility? I think that's a really good question. So let's put those all together. Let's say that Valve is using KDE. KDE offers desktop, mobile, laptop user interface. Could we see a Steam phone then predicated on an ARM or a Zen processor architecture? I don't think we can dismiss that possibility outright. I, and again, coming back to Steam Link. The Steam Link was kind of a failure, for lack of a better word, because it was an obsolescence device. The Steam Link was already obsolescent, was basically designed to be obsolescent because it had hardware features that were slowly going out of circulation. Like it had an Ethernet port. Okay, if you're really big about security and you're really big about predictable performance, you're probably not using a wireless connection. You probably preferred wired. But most people who do streaming or casting to a device probably aren't using wired devices. They'll just settle for the drop in quality and take the hit in performance for using a wireless system. And so that's something to keep in mind when looking at the Steam Link. And now the Steam Link is effectively a software package that works on mobile devices. Now, if you were Valve, you already had familiarity with the ARM platform, you already had manufactured your own operating system for one, you're still updating that and to keep this in mind, the Steam Link still has its software packages being updated to stay in sync with the upstream Steam. A Steam phone really doesn't sound that far out of plausibility. It may not give you all of the functionality of the Steam Deck, but it would be a little bit more portable. And it's something where if I was Valve, I'd strongly be thinking about that as an option. And with Plasma Mobile, simply swapping from the Steam interface to an open source platform, well, it's not really that hard. It really isn't. So, excuse me. The next big question then is, how far can this go? Can Valve manage its own device infrastructure? And yeah, I'm kind of typing this out as I'm doing it so that if you're watching, I'm hoping this logic train makes sense of how we got from talking about the Steam Deck to suddenly a theoretical Steam phone, and wow, defense? Obviously, Kwrite doesn't really have a spell check function built in, and I'm getting really tired. Alright, so again, trying to wrap this up. I think my personal opinion is that Valve's use of KDE in the Steam Deck, Valve pushing out a hardware device that, as far as I can tell from the scalpers and from the interest from everybody that I have linked on my Steam account, from everybody that's linked on the Steam account Rieta is using, All of those people have all pre-registered for Steam Deck. This appears to be the biggest hardware product Valve has ever pushed out. And I need to make a note to bug Ryeta about that. See if I can get him on one of these streams. Bounce back and forth and talk about it. Okay, so the big point here, or at least one of the points I really want to ask is just how far can the device infrastructure go? The Steam machines were a complete failure, partially because Valve was naive, trusting. They depended on ODMs, and ODMs, original design manufacturers and original equipment manufacturers, and downstream and upstream software vendors to do the jobs that they theoretically were supposed to be doing, and that didn't happen. In some cases, we knew it wasn't going to happen. We knew that the OEM vendors selling Steam machines weren't interested because they weren't what fit in with the rest of the product marketing portfolio. And that's again the Steam Deck as a direct response to that. Valve's not giving those vendors another chance. The Dells, the HPs, the Walmart brands you can pick up, they just kind of all failed. And Valve's going, okay, this time we're not even going to bother with you. We're going to sell direct. We're going to contract direct. We're going to build direct. And that gives Valve the entire advantage. Valve has the drivers. They have the employees. They have the hardware. The question is, how much hardware facility manufacturing capability does Valve have? Could Valve fab its own ARM processors and run Proton on top of those ARM processors? I think the answer to that is I would not say no. I think the answer could very well be yes. We don't know the full extent of what Valve actually owns or has an interest in. And after everything that Valve went through with the Steam machines, after everything Valve went through with the Steam Deck, after everything Valve went through with the Steam controller, after all of the rigmarole and dancing and everything around the Steam VR systems, I don't think it is unreasonable to say that Valve is at the point where they're just, screw it, we'll do it alone. We'll go it alone, we'll manufacture it alone. If we don't have anybody willing to partner with us, fine, we'll do it ourselves. Now, they got AMD partnered, and again, I believe, and I'll restate this for this stream, I don't think Lisa Su understood the influence of the CCP over the fabrication facilities in mainland China. I do not believe that Lisa Su, Dr. Lisa Su of AMD, was aware that the vast majority of graphic cards that were built with chips bought from AMD and sent to the factories. I don't believe Dr. Lisa Su knew that the majority of those were going to be sold directly to Bitcoin miners working for the Communist Chinese Party. I don't think she was aware of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why AMD could be driving so hard at the Steam Deck. We really don't know how many changes, how many optimizations, how much of this is a custom unit, how much of this has been Dr. Lisa Su going, we are going to have a successful RDNA 2 product on the market, and it's going to be on the market this year. Bring it. I've said before, AMD is done swinging and getting foul balls. They're done going. AMD is done with going for just single basis or maybe an occasional double. Dr. Lisa Su has given every indication she wants home runs every time. She wants Ryzen processors knocking it out of the park on every single release. She wants it to happen with our DNA products, and it just hasn't been. Some of that, okay, been out of her control, and that's where we get back to Valve. How much control does Valve have? How much of this is being done internally? There's a lot of questions to be answered on the Steam Deck, which comes down to the biggest question. And I'll type this one out again, do any of these questions actually matter? Would any answer stop you from buying a Steam Deck? And I think for most people who've already pre-registered, already looked at the price points and already said, I'm going to save up for that. I'm going to get that. I'm going to put it on a credit card. I'm getting one. And that's the big thing here. Kind of the elephant sitting in the room. I don't think any of it matters. If we got all of these questions answered, and they were all answered in the best case scenario, that the Steam Deck is as powerful and capable as I think it could be, that like with when Valve underspec the dual channel memory until someone went, hang on, that's not making any sense. Excuse me. I think, keeping all of that in mind, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at what Intel really wanted with the Z GPU. They wanted a device that, when launched, would be so desirable and priced so attractively that it would dominate everything else in the market. Nintendo effectively took them out of the running by playing games with the Switch Pro and going with the Switch OLED. Now, again, if Nintendo had been upfront with investors when investors acted and said, it's a problem with Nvidia, it's out of our control, there might be a little bit more sympathy, empathy, less harshness, but there's not. Nintendo chose to play games, dodge questions, and not not answer direct questions about what was going on. Keeping that in mind, then, Valve's got an opening. If Nintendo had landed a Switch Pro on time, on schedule, on performance, and actually taken advantage of some of the hardware capability that Nvidia could offer, the Steam Deck might have just been one of it would have been like the Steam machines. It would have been oh, hey, look what Valve is doing. That's kind of interesting, kind of cool. Hey, good job, Valve, but yeah, I'm not going to spend my money on one of those. But that's not what's happening this time. What's happening this time is a massive, overwhelming market response from people who are saying, yeah, we're going to buy one. And it doesn't really matter about any of the specifications. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter if it's a worst case scenario where we imagine that it's going to be worse than we think it is. Well, it's not really up to us, now is it? It's really up to the game developers who have hands on with it. Can they get anything good out of the system? Developers who have been working with the Steam Deck, the ones that Valve has shared the prototype with, are all going, this thing is pretty powerful. It's doing exactly what we want it to do in the resolution we expected to do it. With that in mind, then, and again, I come back to the question. If the Steam Deck is only as powerful as it looked to be on launch, and the market response was overwhelmingly positive, and then it comes out later, it's really going to be more capable, it's really going to have more advanced hardware because of the timing delay, because of when it's actually going to be built, because of when everything comes together, they can do this feature with it that wasn't in the prototypes. Let's say we get that second USB Type-C port. Let's say we get a second USB Type-C port and we keep the headphone jack. That would make everyone happy. And then we kind of come back to it. Knowing that you're pre-purchasing effectively an unfinished device. I'm not going to say it's like a Kickstarter. This is Valve we're talking about. Valve's hardware quality is... I actually did this with somebody who was thinking about a Steam Deck. So I went and they have a PlayStation. And so I went and I got a Wii U Pro controller. And I got, since I have a Steam controller, I put that in my pocket. And so I went back to them and go, okay, you're familiar with your PlayStation controller, right? And go, yeah, it's kind of a cheap plastic feel. Really cheap plastic feel. Okay, well, this is what happens when Nintendo makes a controller. And I handed them the Wii U Pro controller. And they immediately remarked on it was definitely better built. The buttons had more response. The analog triggers were sharper. It was definitely a better built controller. All right. Well, this is what happens when Valve builds a controller, and I handed the Valve controller over. And The first thing they commented on was the weight. It actually felt solid, like it had a metal frame inside, that it wasn't a cheap component. The second thing they noticed is that the analog stick felt better than the Nintendo analog sticks. The buttons felt more solid than the Nintendo controller. The trackpads were a lot weird, but they felt, for how they felt, not hooked up to anything, not using them, they had a touch of quality to them. They didn't feel cheap. And that comes back to the Steam Deck. And coming back to every product Valve has made. I'm really not aware of anybody complaining about the build quality on Steam's VR products. And those are literally being used by people flinging their arms around at random. I've never heard anybody complain about the build quality of the Steam controller. I've heard lots of people complain about the size of it, me included, but I've never heard anybody complain that it's poorly made or poorly manufactured or that there hasn't been engineering given to the actual hardware construction. Now, to be fair, I've heard the same thing said about Microsoft products. I personally use an Xbox controller on my PC. I have an Xbox Series X, and the Xbox Series X controller feels just as good as the old Xbox controller. I mean, I really don't see the point of the whole Elite line. But then again, I'm kind of a keyboard and mouse person to begin with, so say what you will about that. Alright, so again, to wrap this up, I think Valve, I think even if all of the questions are answered, I don't think it's going to change anybody's opinion. The Steam Deck, on the surface, is amazing value for money. It probably will be the most powerful computing device that average gamers who can't spend all day refreshing websites, auctions, or otherwise, or refreshing Newegg, or playing lottery games. I think it's the only realistic computing device they'll be able to get their hands on, and for many of them, it's probably going to be a significant upgrade over what they have now. Now, speaking for myself, okay, fine, fair point. The Steam Deck is probably not going to be much of a performance upgrade over the 290X, other than the fact that unlike the 290X, it's probably going to work and not crash. On the other hand, thinking about the media server that I'm on now, the 1660, I am really curious in 1920 by 1080 if the Steam Deck is capable of equaling or bettering the performance of this system. And it would be a fair apples to apples comparison because this system is running Linux as well. I'd be running the same games. And while we come back around to the games, we'll come back around to the page that's been open for a while. And you can see Ryada's been playing this as well recently. And so I'm under Linux, and as you can see in my yesterday not recommended, this would not load on Windows 10. Now, I haven't really done anything special. Come on, are you responding, window? Oh, this is going to be embarrassing if the Steam has actually crashed. Okay, it responded that way. Let's bring it back up. Library. Well, that was weird. And I don't know if that was Steam or the NVIDIA card. Okay, so properties. Enable Steam overlay. General compatibility. We're not going to force a specific Steam Play compatibility. We're going to hit play and see. Okay, we'll launch with Steam Play. And okay, ready to launch. Okay, so we got a timer counting down. Alright, it just jumped. I don't know if I have a bandwidth limiter in place, but on the presumption that I do, let's override it. And since I commented on this, and I kind of want to end this out. I know that Fallout 4 has problems on Windows 10. The launcher would not let me get into the game. And I realize this is probably the first time in, what, 12 years, maybe more, that I've actually shown the Steam account I use on a camera. And it's finished downloading. What are you doing now? While I'm waiting on this, I'm going to grab something more to drink. Okay. Oh, there we go. Just going through a first time setup. Although installing DirectX for Windows does seem kind of pointless right now, but okay, whatever. Processing Vulkan shaders, well, that's at least something. Uh, yeah, and yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is just been playing the same track on loop for like the past hour. But that's okay. At part, I'm almost pretty sure I could whistle along to it. Excuse me. And I've got to make a note to try that EVGA capture card on here. I mean, I know it's not certified for use on Linux, and the Asus Tough Card capture card is, but I really don't have the money to go out and buy another capture card. Alright, we are at still processing Vulkan shaders. Oh, that's better than nothing. Oh, yeah. While we're Fallout 4 will now detect. Okay, this is actually further. Video quality was unidentifiable. Well, let's go with high, cause, and we're gonna set this for windowed mode and borderless, cause I have no idea how well this is gonna work. Okay, play. Well, we didn't get a crash, which is good. Oh, and yeah, if you're wondering why I picked up Dorfro Romantic, I'm not sure I said that right. It's because of a channel called Real Civil Engineer. A British civil engineer occasionally does game streams, and oof, hey, My character is still alive, and I have no idea where exactly I'm going to log in at. I think I was in an expansion the last time I played this. But so far, we're actually, again, this is a Linux system. Uh, so, assumably, everything I could run on here will run on the Steam Deck. And I just loaded and launched Fallout 4. And it's running better than it does on Windows 10. Well, at least it happened on camera. And kind of like, come on, load. Just load. Don't crash. And yeah, no, this is one of those probably should have done this beforehand and didn't. Okay, while I'm actually waiting on that, I'm gonna bring up something else that. Oh, wait, we are in. We are. Where am I? Okay, I appear to be in the Commonwealth. So I'm actually just gonna go over here to Sanctuary. Yes, fast travel. Now, since it's been a long while since I've played, and there have been a number of patches and updates since then, I'm not even sure I'm going to find what I halfway expect to find. Uh, and part of this is, again, just to show that, again, standard Linux system, and we are running Fallout 4. Wouldn't run on Windows 10, running fine on Linux. And yeah, okay, everything. Yeah, I'm carrying too much and can't run, so. Uh, let's do. Uh, how do I salvage? And why do I have so much stuff? What was I doing? I feel like it's a valid question. What was I doing? Alright, anyway, since I'm in here, when I was building this, I went up and I put all the bunks up top. And if you look over there, there is a collection of armors. I just started coming back and parking all of my armors on top here. And to make sure that the citizens couldn't get them accidentally, there's no, as far as I recall, NPC followable path to get the power armors. So they're just sitting up here, some over here, some over there. Yeah, I was collecting, I got a bunch of different power armors. And we can actually, since this is working, uh, kind of run through. Like, this was the first time where I worked on moving something up, and I moved the mortar up off the ground. Alright, I think the workbench was. No, the workbench is back this way. And obviously, I have the perk that spends AP so that even if you're overloaded, you can still run or walk normally for a short while. Uh, but yeah, I did all of this construction before. Okay, E-workshop. No, that's not quite what I wanted. Crafting. Oh no, that's R transfer. T store all junk. Uh, Alright. Now I gotta remember how do I... No, wait, that's the workbench. R transfer. Okay, well, let's do E craft and R scrap. Yep, R scrap. Scrap, 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 scrap. Why do I have 4 Gatling lasers? I'm not sure why I have a... And I can't even remember if there's a scrap all. I have a serious question. What was I looting? Yeah, this is a problem with coming back to a game that you haven't played in a while. Your character's doing something and you have no idea what. One shot, one cap. One shot, one dead. One step doom. Alright, what did that do to my inventory? Yeah, enter, exit. I'm still at 3,000. What all am I carrying? Serious question. What am I doing with all this stuff? Lobster trap helmet. Alright, well, I found what I wanted to find. That Fallout 4 does indeed work on Linux, does actually indeed work apparently better than it does on my actual desktop computer running the operating system it's supposed to run on. Uh, and that I think really bodes well for the Steam Deck as playing games. Valve made a big claim. I mean, a big claim that all of their library will be playable on the Steam Deck because there's a lot of games that were made entirely with Windows and DirectX in mind. But even the jankiest of them, possibly one of the most difficult to run, has always it basically been any Bethesda game because Bethesda's internal code practices are terrible, and I'm hearing nightmares out of code management now that they got a new owner who uh, Phil Spencer, does know a thing or two about good coding practices. And say what I will about Microsoft's previous code systems, the Xbox division have been pretty reliable about figuring out how to strip the Windows systems down and make relatively stable platforms. It's the 360 was a disaster, hardware and software, but I never heard any complaints about Xbox One. I'm certainly not hearing complaints about Xbox Series X other than people who do dumb things with it. But that was what I really wanted to end this with, was showing a difficult game that doesn't even work properly in Windows, working fine under Linux. And with that, I guess I'm out for tonight. I'm going to try and get that thing called sleep. I don't know if I'm going to be successful. I'm pretty sure I did not mute the mic in time for earlier. But with that, I'm out. This is Aurian Archive.